It's probably a good idea to make a start rather than those of you who have come along having to wait for a while. It's fantastic to have those of you who are here come along and to hear more about the MA Heritage Management. I imagine that those who are joining today have an interest in starting the course, perhaps this coming academic year, perhaps the year after that. My name is Ed Legon. I am one of the program directors of the MA Heritage Management based at Queen Mary, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that later on. It's wonderful that we are joined by one of our esteemed alumni in the form of Minette Butler, who is now employed by Historic Royal Palaces. Minette, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, yeah, my name is Minette Butler. I was on the MA of Heritage Management with QMUL and HRP in 2020 to 2021. And yeah, I currently work for Historic Royal Palaces as Assistant Curator of Public History. And yeah, it's really lovely to come back and see John and Ed and talk a bit about the course.
Fantastic. Thanks very much indeed, Minette. It's really great to have you here. And John,
Thanks, Steve.
hello.
Hello, hi, thanks. Yes, my name's John Davis. I'm Programme Director of the MA Heritage Management on the Historic Royal Palaces side. So whereas Ed looks after everything over at the Queen Mary side, I look at what's going on in the palaces and oversee the side of the course that's delivered there. And also in the background, I'm a historian. I'm part of the research team at Historic Royal Palaces, which in turn is part of the curatorial department.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, John. So I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the overall structure of the MA, because we know that's something that prospective students are interested in knowing more about. It's worth saying that one of the unique features of the MA is its collaborative nature, and you will already have got a sense of that from hearing from me and John in our introduction. So it's a collaboration between Queen Mary University of London, which for those who don't know is based in Mile End in East London, and Historic Royal Palaces, which, if you didn't know already, is the charity that looks after the Tower of London, Hampton Court Palace, Kew Palace, Kensington Palace, Banqueting House, which is in Whitehall, and Hillsborough Castle in Northern Ireland as well. So the MA is split roughly 50-50 between Queen Mary and Historic Royal Palaces. And John is going to talk a little bit more about what happens at the HRP side of things a little bit later on. Another unique feature of the MA that's worth mentioning is that it's not just based within Queen Mary, but specifically within the School of Business and Management. And SBM, as it's abbreviated to, is a fantastic business school which focuses particularly on issues of social justice, sustainability, and good governance as well. So, as well as being an MA about the theory and the practice of heritage, it's also an MA that's interested in business management in current social contexts. And really, through the course of the MA, we seek to provide students with the knowledge and skills that they need to enter into the workforce as heritage professionals, including at a management level. And this builds on our experience that heritage sites and museums need both practical skills, but also management skills, and indeed an understanding of how those skills can be applied within rapidly changing social and political contexts as well. So just to talk a little bit more about the Queen Mary side before handing over to John. The course starts with an introduction to heritage theory and practice with yours truly. So here we explore some of the major issues which heritage managers around the world are facing right now. So some of the most kind of topical issues, some of which you will have encountered in the news because they are very topical. In addition to this, you take 3 elective modules over the course of your studies from the School of Business and Management. So these are introductions to a range of areas of business management, so leadership, marketing, project management, and risk management as well, to give you a few examples. And students also benefit from elective modules drawn from our sister MA programme in creative industries and arts organisations. So this includes looking at organising within the cultural sector, funding and financing in the cultural sector, and especially there's an emphasis on concerns for ecology and the environment within the cultural sector as well. And it's worth noting that students often see these elective modules as being matched up with their placement experiences on the MA. And John's going to speak more about that a little bit later on. Another thing to mention is that we have something called the Leadership Seminar at the Queen Mary side, to which we invite industry professionals from around the cultural sector. And in fact, we had one last night, which was very successful. We had a fantastic speaker in the form of David Suden, who's worked for Historic Royal Palaces and the British Museum, and has currently been involved in a project seeking to regenerate the former potteries in Stoke-on-Trent. And that's a more kind of informal setting through which one of the means via which we introduce students to people who are working in the sector. Also worth mentioning that the MA, like many other MAs, culminates in a dissertation, 6,000 word dissertation. And here we really encourage students to pursue whatever aspect of heritage management they want to. We seek to individualise the MA as much as we possibly can. Just finally, before I hand over to John, I know that people are often interested in what kinds of assessment methods are used on master's programs. There are a range of these throughout the course, from traditional essay-style assignments to field work, group work, presentations, and in some cases exams, but that's only in a minority of cases and entirely within the elective modules. So if you're desperate not to do an exam, then I think there's ample opportunity for you to avoid doing so. So that's a very broad-brushed introduction to the Queen Mary half of the programme. It may be that there are specific questions that this raises in your mind, and you're very welcome to ask those later on. But for now, I'm just going to pass over to John to speak a little bit more about the HRP side of proceedings.
As Ed has already said, this is, a true collaboration between the two institutions, and that also applies to the academic content of the course. So Ed has already emphasised the delivery of the theoretical and analytical side of things over at Queen Mary, together with business and management modules. And what we do over on the Historic Royal Palaces side is allow you as a student then to explore these theoretical and business orientated themes within the workplace setting. So we really encourage people to take to look at HRP almost as an opportunity to explore heritage management and think critically about heritage management, but also to build up practical skills through engaging with people across the organisation, as well as forming networks, which can be really important when it comes through to careers. So in very broad brush terms, I think the Historic Royal Palaces component can be broken down into two areas. One of them is the masterclasses, which are formed into a module which we call Managing Heritages at Historic Royal Palaces. We invite in about 35 speakers, leaders from their professional areas from across Historic Royal Palaces to come in and talk to students in masterclasses about their areas of work. And this is a really interesting opportunity to listen to people reflecting on their careers, talking about the content of their jobs, talking about challenges that they're currently facing, and also thinking about the future of their areas is an opportunity for you as a student to actually ask questions and discuss things with the practitioners and explore ideas about not just your dissertation and your research interests, for example, which Ed has already talked about, but to think through opportunities for career progression from the MA. So the masterclasses are a really key component. They're also a great networking event. We tie it together with a kind of social aspect, which allows students to talk to each other and allows you to then mingle with HRP staff. So they're a really interesting opportunity. Now, the other side of things, which Ed has already pointed to, are the work placements. So this is the work placements are organised under the heading, a module heading, professional practice at Historic Royal Palaces. And every student on the course undertakes at least 3 placements as part of their MA. The placements involve you working in departments across the organisation, so in the different directorates and departments of the organisation, but also across the palaces, which is a really kind of key component of the experience. Just to give you an indication of some of the placements that we've currently got on offer, we've got students placed in curating, in conservation and collections care, in interpretation, working with the communities team, the buildings project management team, the exhibitions project management team, fire, health and safety, digital production, operations, which is working with the heads of Kensington Palace and Hampton Court Palace, and gardens. We've got students doing placements in the gardens around Hampton Court, which is absolutely fantastic, particularly at the moment as spring is starting, and development, so that's fundraising, and also media and PR. So we've got lots of opportunities there, and there are other placements as well, which I'm happy to talk about at greater length. But the placements give you an opportunity then to experience work at Historic Royal Palaces. They're a proper work experience. You're there during work hours. You're in the offices, you're working with teams, but often one-to-one with practitioners. And so they're a really fantastic opportunity for you to find out more about the working life of people in heritage, to reflect on and experience the different areas of practice and whether or not this is an area you'd like to go into, but also to form links with the practitioners in those areas. So very often people that you'll meet on the placements can serve as very valuable referees for you when you go on to get jobs in the heritage sector. So I think it's one of the reasons why the MA Heritage Management is so effective in terms of student employability after the MA, which is something that Ed and I can talk about a bit more later. Just to repeat what Ed was saying about the assessments, it's very interesting on the HRP side that we have assessments which are essentially pieces of work which practitioners put together. So for the masterclasses, for example, we're asking students to undertake things like interpretation text and produce a statement of significance and put together a project management project mandate, which is the beginning of the project management process, either for an exhibition or a buildings project. And very often people who've done the MA who get a job write back and tell us that these were actually really significant components of the MA when it came to securing a role, and it's something that people are able to put on their CVs alongside the experience they've had in all the placement areas as something which they know about and are familiar with and they've already handled. So these are key pieces of information for you to know about at this point in time. So I think that's about it. I think just to finish off by saying that throughout the masterclasses and the placements, you have an opportunity to gather information in preparation for the dissertation. So the dissertation, which Ed has mentioned, can very much build upon practice-based research. which you've experienced during your time with historic royal palaces. So, and it's an opportunity for you to really focus in on an area of practice if that's what you wish to do. Other than that, I just mentioned that it's a great social experience. As a student on the MA, you get free access to all the palaces, including the areas behind the scenes, which staff are given access to. You very often get invited to events which HRP is organising, which are fantastic. We also arrange each year a visit across to Hillsborough Castle in Northern Ireland as a field trip, and that's a really excellent experience for all the students. And I think my experience of the course is that students bond very well with each other, and this is something Minette may want to talk about a little bit more, and often stay in touch with each other and become part of the MA Heritage Management family. So at that point, I'll hand back to Ed.
Just to sort of add to what John has been saying, I suppose the first thing that comes out of what he was talking about is that the MA is not two divided halves, it's two halves which very much work in tandem with each other. So broadly speaking, the more kind of theoretical side at Queen Mary and the more practical side at HRP. And that's as a result of John and I having worked together now for 7 years in putting this MA together. One thing that I know people are very interested to know more about is the part-time option for the MA and how that compares with the full-time option. In essence, it's precisely the same program which you undertake, but it's over 2 years instead of 1. And in effect, you undertake the masters at half speed. In terms of how much time you'd be spending on the MA for full-time students, we tend to say that you should expect that it's the same as working a full-time job. You're likely to be expected either at Queen Mary in Mile End or at one of HRP's sites, depending on where you're doing your placements, for 4 or 5 days a week. For part-time students, that's broadly half. We're talking about maybe 2 or 3 days a week that you'd be expected to be at HRP or at Queen Mary, but they won't necessarily be on the same day, as it were. It may be that you would be expected to come 2 or 3 times a week if you're part-time. That said, the feedback from part-time students is that it is manageable around other responsibilities that those students may have, such as, for instance, undertaking paid work. I just want to talk about kind of our students, what's expected in terms of entry requirements, and also where our students tend to come from. So as you may have already read on the website, students who undertake the course are required to have a 2-1 level degree or above at any undergraduate level subject. And that's quite important to us. We don't anticipate at all that people that come onto the course have any kind of educational background in heritage, and we cater to all comers in that respect. There's also an English language requirement, so I will point you towards the website if you think that might be relevant to you. As mentioned, students who come to the course can come from a range of backgrounds. As you might expect, we have a lot of historians or people who did history at undergraduate level, some people who've already done some kind of heritage, but that tends to be a small minority, I would say. We have people that have come from more kind of social science backgrounds, some who have done business degrees at undergraduate level, arts degrees as well. But as mentioned, we don't anticipate that people will have done heritage of any kind previously. Something really important to underline is that we have a significant number of alumni who came onto the course having spent 10, 20 years in work undertaking different careers. And we very much encourage people to join the course if that sounds like your own experience. Students who come onto the course are often interested in very many different types of heritage. So some of those will understandably be very attracted to the course because of their existing interest in historic royal palaces, but others are interested in material culture, objects, crafts, folklore, oral tradition, cultural memory, the whole range of things that we might incorporate into a definition of heritage. So don't assume that you necessarily have to have expertise in historic royal palaces to be able to undertake the course. Just a final thing to say before I pass back over to John to talk a little bit more about where students have gone afterwards. I would say that only a minority of students who start the course have a very clear sense of precisely what they want to do after they've done the MA. In most cases, students use the course precisely as a basis to explore the diversity on offer, theoretically, practically, etc. Use that as a basis to then decide what kind of career in heritage they may wish to pursue. And even those who come onto the course with an apparently clear sense of what they want to do often change tack, not least because they've been introduced to different areas of heritage practice on John's wonderful modules over at HRP.
To follow on a point which Ed was saying, that students very often come onto the MA with one idea of where they want to work and leave with a very different idea. And one of the great things about the MA is it gives you an insight into all these areas of practice which exist in heritage. And it's a real eye-opener as to the variety of areas of practice. The other lesson I think which probably most students draw from the masterclasses in particular is just how flexible people's careers are. So very often people will work in heritage and they'll transfer out of heritage into industry or the private sector, and then they may transfer back again. So it is, some of these areas of practice are very much sort of areas that are engaging with external sectors of the economy as well. So that's an interesting thing. In terms of student progression after the course, I think the working statistic I've got is about 70% of students who've done the MA are employed in the heritage sector within a year of completing the course, which I think is a pretty high rate of employability beyond the course. One thing to mention is that it's not necessarily the case that the course is a preparation for a PhD, but quite a few students have gone on to do PhDs, and the MA does provide a very good sort of basis for people who want to go on and do a research degree. Just to say that 8 of our former students have gone on to work for historic royal palaces, which is great, but we haven't set the MA up as particularly as a route for recruiting people in historic royal palaces. And some of those people who are at HRP went away and worked for other organisations before they came back again. But nevertheless, as I said, at the moment we've got quite a few former students, alumni, who are now working for HRP across the organisation, which is great. Other former students have gone on to work at places like the British Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Imperial War Museum, the Science Museum, National Trust, English Heritage, National Lottery Heritage Fund, the Royal Horticultural Society, the Royal Geographical Society, the Royal Society of Arts, Fitzwilliam Museum, Brent Museum, Manchester Heritage, Liverpool Big Heritage, Bradford Museum, Coventry Cathedral, City of London Heritage Spaces, National Museums of Wales, Crathis Castle in Scotland, National Churches Trust, Althorpe House, Apsley House, Boston Manor House, Wimbledon Tennis Museum, which is fantastic, Thackeray Museum of Medicine, Ancestry.com, Hayley Sharp Heritage Events in Leicester, the Tricolour Associates, in local government, and in education, as some former students have decided to go on and become teachers, which is fantastic because schools and learning is such an important part of the heritage provision. So I think that gives you something of the range of the destinations that alumni are working in across the UK. We've also got, I would say about 30% of our student intake is from overseas. Now, many of those students have decided to stay in the UK afterwards, but some have decided to return either to their home country or to other countries. And so we've got students based in America, in Ireland, in Hungary and in Poland. And so, you know, I could go on, but it gives you some idea of the range of places that people are working in. Just to mention that the international dimension of the course is a really interesting one, and one that we really foster. So we greatly welcome students coming in from overseas, because it gives us an opportunity to talk about heritage and the international aspects of heritage. But also it allows students from overseas to, I suppose, to benefit from insights into historic royal palaces, and then take that back with them to their home countries if that's what they want to do. So hopefully that gives people some sort of an idea. We do like to stay in touch with all our alumni. We try and maintain contacts. We support them. There is a careers and enterprise office over at Queen Mary, which gives people support, I think, for at least 18 months beyond graduation with career progression, and it's a very effective platform, which is great. But as I say, Ed and I are staying in contact with the MA Heritage Management alumni family.
Just to finish, I suppose, before handing over to Minette, John alluded there to the support by the careers team within the university. I very much back that up, and mention also that that support exists throughout the program as well. And employability is really fundamental to the master's program. So John's spoken about the extent to which the work at the HRP side of things involves interacting regularly with professionals in the masterclass and placement setting. It's also worth mentioning again the leadership seminar, which again exposes students to people working right now and in fact leading in the cultural sector. That's designed, that module, specifically as an opportunity to network with those kinds of people. John also mentioned that we've had a student go on to work at Wimbledon tennis, and in fact that student invited us back, or invited us to, I should say, Wimbledon tennis earlier on this year for a dedicated careers day, where we provided guidance to students tailored specifically to the heritage job market. And that alumnus also spoke to students currently on the course about what applying for heritage jobs can be like, and their own career trajectory as well. Very finally, in terms of the other support available at Queen Mary, there are dedicated writing and methods tutors. So if you are coming back to academia after a period in work, then there are people at Queen Mary who can support you with academic writing if that's something you're worried about. John and I are very dedicated to our cohort, and we're always here to support students whenever they need that support. There are also academic advisors within the School of Business and Management as well. But otherwise, I think it's time to hand over to someone who has also come back to speak with the students, for which we're very grateful, about their own experience, having graduated from the MA Heritage Management and gone on to work for historic royal palaces. So, Minette, it's over to you.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, John. Yes, so as I mentioned before, I joined the MA Heritage Management Programme in the autumn of 2020, which was an interesting year to be doing an MA. But just straight off the bat, I'd just like to say that both John and Ed and Queen Mary and HRP were incredibly supportive of all of us during what I imagine was a very incredibly difficult time to be running an MA programme. They were incredibly diligent in looking after us, making sure we had all the support we needed. So yeah, that was a really important part, I think, of my MA experience over that period. So before I joined the MA, I studied history at undergrad at the University of Southampton. And then after completing the MA in the summer of 2021, I went on to work for a small museum in East London that was actually focused around the history of death and funerals, so managing a private collection. And then in 2023, I came back to Historic Royal Palaces, where I now work as an assistant curator of public history. So that's mainly working on digital projects, but also general public output for the curators team. So one of the things that really stood out to me for the MA, which is part of the reason I chose it, was that balance between having the Queen Mary, more academic heritage theory side, but also really having that professional experience with a heritage organisation. So while I was doing the MA, much of the pretty much everything was done online, though we did have some on-site moments, which was very exciting for all of us. But even then, particularly things like the master classes and our professional placements have gone to be really essential when I've been looking for jobs and trying to pursue my career. So in terms of the master classes, what I really loved about the course was the fact that you got to experience all just the whole range of all the work that goes on in the heritage sector. So I feel like when a lot of people are when they first think about heritage, when they're first thinking about joining it professionally, they might be familiar with things like curatorial and research, maybe collections conservation and management. But many of us, I know in my year, didn't know that you could have careers in things like development, so fundraising, things like press and PR. We also heard from risk management, we heard from finance, we heard from publishing, and I think it gave us this really holistic experience. We got a real sense of all the different ways, not only all the different ways that you could join the heritage sector and you could get a career, but I know personally for me, working in curatorial, I'm constantly working with other teams all the time. And I think it's really important that I also know what they do. And I think it gives, like, heritage is a fundamentally collaborative industry, I think, and particularly here at HRP. So I wrote down a list of all the departments that I've emailed in the last 2 days, which includes digital, press, conservation collections management, live programming, schools, development, membership. And I believe all of those teams either came to speak to us in masterclasses or we encountered them at some point during the MA. So that was really one of the highlights for me, was getting to see and meet all these different teams. In terms of the placements, so for my placements, I did a curatorial placement with Dr. James Spooner, where I worked on a project based at Banqueting House Whitehall, which is one of HRP's 6 sites, where I did some research in looking for Indigenous peoples who visited the Banqueting House in the 18th century, which was very exciting. We also had a series of sessions with conservation and collections care. So we got to see all the different ways that they not only look after the objects and the collections, which is something that I was more familiar with, but things like preparing HRP sites for things like big events and big corporate events, things like weddings, but also exhibitions, day-to-day activities, which we all found really, really interesting. And again, it's just one of many ways that the heritage sector keeps these places open for the public, and all the many ways that these sites are still used and remain relevant today. But also, my final placement was with the front of house team at Kensington Palace. And this was when, some of you may be familiar or may remember, when Princess Diana's wedding dress was on display for Royal Style in the Making. So all of us on the placement, all of us in the MA, I should say, joined the front of house team for a few weeks in the summer. And that was, I think that might be actually my favourite placement we did. One, because it was very exciting to be on site, but also I think you get a really good sense of the public when they come to see these sites. What do they want? What are they interested in? I think that's always really essential when you're thinking about heritage, as ultimately it's for everyone. And getting a chance to actually see a site from a public perspective and understand what they're interested in and the kind of stories that they want to hear was really, really fascinating. So yeah, the support from Ed and HRP colleagues through all of these, making sure these placements happened, was incredible. And we all felt really, really lucky. A lot of people came off furlough to talk to us, actually, throughout the entire experience. In terms of modules, I did the Heritage Theory and Practice module with Ed, which, as Ed was saying, particularly the year that we were doing it, obviously heritage never fails to be in the news, but particularly in that moment, heritage was just the things like in 2020, things like with Black Lives Matter, and with discussions about the place that heritage has in national identity. It was constantly on our minds, and the chance to be able to talk to that in an academic context was fascinating. And also, as John was saying, the international aspect of the other students on the course really added to the discussions that we had. I think particularly because a lot of us were interested in the sense of like historic buildings practices, but to hear about people who had more experience in the stories of oral histories and folklore, I think you come away with this sense that heritage is everywhere, and the chance to really actually sit and think about that and research it in different ways was really, really exciting and fascinating for all of us. As John was saying, with the Managing Heritages module, when we had part of the assessment was actually producing documents and producing work that heritage professionals do every day. So John mentioned that we produced interpretive panel text, we produced a statement of significance and project mandates. I'll say personally that I write a lot of interpretive text in my job now, and the ability to actually say that I had experience doing that was part of the reason why I got my previous job working in a small museum. I also know from my colleagues who work in the buildings curatorial department, they write statements of significance all the time, and the chance to actually sit down with them and talk about the process in which they write them, the kinds of things they're looking for, how to apply academic research into a more practical context was really, really essential. I think it shows the place that the MA sits in between these two worlds really shows that that's where heritage sits as well. So that was really great experience. And yeah, as John said with the project manager, all of these documents, just the ability to say that not just that you've thought about heritage in a more theoretical sense, but to actually able to produce something that people use every day in this industry was really, really helpful. Just going down my notes I have here, in terms of the dissertation, I think as Ed and John were saying, it's a real chance to put everything that we did in the course into practice, and just the range of people just in my year alone, the range of topics that we all wrote about really shows the kind of all the places that this MA can take you. So personally, I was very interested more in the theoretical side. I wrote about the use of Hampton Court Palace and sense of authenticity, so the fact that there is a version of Hampton Court Palace at Disneyland. And I wrote about where does that sit when we're talking about authentic heritage experiences and appropriation in commercial context. But then I also had another friend on the course who wrote her dissertation about accessibility and accommodating people with visual impairments in exhibition spaces. So you really, really get a chance to really follow where your interests lie and to tailor your dissertation into the kinds of careers that you want to follow, which I found really incredibly useful. And was very, again, as I say, I continue to use the skills that I picked in this MA every day. And just finally, as Ed and John have said, all of us in the MA, we all keep in contact with each other. Particularly, I think partly because we were all online. The main way we contact each other was through our group chat. So we were all constantly keeping each other up to date. We still, when job opportunities come up, we still message back and forth. As John mentioned, there are a couple of us from the MA who work for Historic Royal Palaces, which was lovely to see us all come back. And I had a lovely moment last year where when I was managing my own curatorial placement, which was very exciting, I ended up, I happened to be filming with somebody from the press team that day who also had their own placement, it was just really lovely. Like, we're all still very much in contact and we're all very excited when we have more MA students coming through. It really does feel like we've got our own little community going on here. But even so, like graduates from the MA are spread out all across the sector. Sometimes if I go to the V&A, I still see someone from my course in the membership team. I think it really goes to show just the depth of experience and all the places that this MA can take you, I think.
So I think we've given everyone, I hope, a pretty good flavour of what the MA Heritage Management at Queen Mary and HRP involves. Those of you who are in attendance, do you have any specific questions that you'd like to ask while John, Minette and I are here? How big is the MA group intake each year, please? So the MA's cohort is around 25, 27 students each year. And it is very unlikely to exceed that in any given year. So it's quite a tight-knit group that very much lends itself to what John was saying earlier on about the cohort identity. Students travel together, often down to Hampton Court Palace for their masterclasses, placement modules, etc. And as Minette alluded to, very clearly, those relationships that people build on the programme continue later on afterwards as well. While perhaps people are thinking of questions, if indeed there are any, were you going to speak to the studentships at all?
Yeah, I'll say a little bit about the studentships. So we offer two, they're called HRP scholarships. Um, that we offer two per year at the moment. They are to pay the fees for part-time study. They're particularly focused on people from underrepresented groups in the heritage sector. So there is some broad brush information on the Queen Mary course page if you go through to finance and funding. But if anyone wants any more detail, they can just send me an email using the address that Ed's put into the chat section, and I've got a slightly more involved document outlining the process for applying for these. They are quite heavily in demand, so they're quite competitive. And we do only offer two per year, but it's a really important part of the provision.
Is there an option to do any of the course online, i.e., if the person is already working, or is attendance on site mandatory? So the answer to that is that attendance in person is compulsory. So there is an expectation that you would attend all sessions at Queen Mary, all at HRP in person. As I said earlier on, and feel free, Jen, to send me an email if you'd like to discuss this further. I'm very happy to do so. If you were to undertake the course part-time, then the likelihood is that you would be spending 2 to 3 days a week on the course. Not all day, I should say, apart from the placement module. So it can be the case that you can mold that around, and we've had many students who have molded that around other kinds of responsibilities that you may have to work or otherwise. Very happy to talk that through because often it's helpful to do so on an individual level, but thanks for the question nonetheless. And that's a very nice note on which to finish. I think heritage is multitudes, and hopefully the Masters gives a flavour of all of the directions in which you can take a career in heritage. Get in touch. No doubt you will have more individualized questions and we can help you with those. Otherwise, all that's left is for me to say a big thank you to John, my co-program director, especially Minette, who's joined us specially today to talk about her experiences on the program. Thanks so much, Minette. And also to Denzel as well for putting this together for us and providing us with an opportunity to speak to people who are interested in joining the course. So otherwise, I hope you enjoy sunny weather, if there is indeed sunny weather where you are today, and we hope to hear from you soon. Okay, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.